Hulk Hogan was once the biggest name in American wrestling, a giant in the ring. But in his final days, he was a broken man fighting not just illness, but a dark betrayal by the people closest to him. What began as chronic pain soon turned into fear, hidden recordings, and a shocking investigation that exposed a disturbing plot involving lies, theft, and slow poisoning. While Hogan tried to hold on to his legacy, those around him were already preparing for his end, not out of concern, but out of greed. Hulk Hogan, the massive star of pro wrestling, had spent decades in the spotlight. From loud crowds and packed arenas to big roles in movies and ads, his life was full of fame, charm, and strength. But as the years passed, the man behind the image began to fade. Once strong and full of energy, Hogan now walked with canes and avoided public places. Fans who saw him described him as empty and weak, a sad sight compared to the legend who once slammed the biggest names in the ring. In his late 60s, Hogan's health began to fail. He had many surgeries on his back, knees, hips, and shoulders. Years of wrestling had wrecked his body. He spoke about the pain often, but very few knew just how bad it had become. He could hardly sleep. Climbing stairs was hard. Even standing for a few minutes left him tired. The lively energy he once had was gone, replaced by stiffness, pain, and a deep fear he couldn't shake. People close to Hogan started seeing changes in his behavior, too. He became quiet and suspicious. He added cameras around his home, and his friendly old staff was replaced by trained workers who had limited access to him. He double-checked his food, refused surprise visits, and kept his medicine locked away. When people asked why, he'd only say, "You can never be too careful." But what truly worried his friends was how much he had begun to distrust everyone. Longtime friends were suddenly shut out. Old wrestling buddies were erased from his contact list. Even family members were held at a distance. Hogan believed people were after his money, his estate, his name. He had built a huge empire, and now he was sure someone was trying to destroy it, starting with him. His worry became an obsession. He wrote notes every day in notebooks, saved every receipt in marked folders, and secretly recorded conversations. He changed his will 2 times in 6 months. There was a panic in his actions, a sense of something dark coming. He told his lawyer he was preparing for danger. At first, people thought it was just age or stress. But then came the fall, the emergency, and the mystery in the hospital. That's when things took a very real and scary turn. It happened on a hot July morning. An emergency call was made from Hogan's Florida mansion. His assistant found him passed out on the floor of his home gym. Paramedics arrived fast. Hogan was barely breathing. He was rushed to the hospital. Doctors found his blood pressure was dangerously high, and he was very dehydrated. But something about it didn't make sense to the medical staff. Blood tests showed strange results. Some substances were normal for his pain care, but others were not on any of his prescriptions. One drug, used mostly in hospitals to help patients sleep, stood out. It wasn't deadly on its own, but mixed with his other meds, it could be very harmful. Hogan was never prescribed it, and it wasn't found among his usual medicines. A nurse who handled his medication noticed the problem and alerted hospital security. While in the hospital, Hogan's behavior got worse. He said someone was trying to poison him. He wouldn't eat unless it came from certain staff. He even accused a nurse of changing his IV, though cameras showed nothing wrong. Some thought it was just fear or confusion, but others started to wonder if he might be right. His chef told police that Hogan's vitamins had been replaced with a brand he didn't order or recognize. Things got even stranger when his bodyguard went to check his home. While Hogan was still in the hospital, in his private office, the safe under his desk had been opened. Several important documents were gone, including a new copy of his will and a letter Hogan had written to his lawyer. There were no signs of a break-in. The safe had been opened with the correct code, meaning someone who knew his habits had done it. Police began to look into those who had regular access to the house. That included family members, caregivers, assistants, and a rotating list of visitors who had come by in the weeks before the incident. With the list of suspects growing and Hogan's condition slowly stabilizing, the situation was becoming more complicated than anyone had anticipated. The collapse, which had first been seen as a health emergency, now hinted at foul play. Hogan himself seemed convinced that someone was after him, not just to hurt him, but to slowly erase everything he had built. He feared the attack on his health was in just nature taking its course. It was a calculated move, and the worst was still to come. In the weeks following his release from the hospital, Hulk Hogan returned to a life cloaked in silence and suspicion. Though his body remained weak, his mind was sharp, too sharp, some said bordering on obsession. He doubled down on security measures, installing motion sensors and updating surveillance systems throughout his mansion. Former employees were replaced with new faces, each subjected to background checks and confidentiality agreements. Yet despite the precautions, he could not shake the feeling that the threat hadn't passed, it had only just begun. Soon, family members he hadn't spoken to in years began appearing. A cousin from California, whom he barely knew, suddenly flew in under the guise of checking in. His estranged daughter, who had kept her distance during his decline, appeared almost overnight with suitcases and offers to help manage the house. Even an old wrestling partner, someone who had been like a brother to him decades ago, came back into the picture, claiming he wanted to reconnect. But Hogan was no longer the trusting man they once knew. He viewed each visitor as a potential suspect. The sense of unease turned into panic when his financial advisor flagged suspicious activity in one of his trust accounts.
Large sums were being transferred in small increments to unfamiliar names, some linked to offshore accounts.
Even more disturbing was that the documents authorizing these transfers bore Una's signature, though he insisted he never signed anything of the sort. His lawyer confirmed the signatures were forgeries, likely traced from older documents kept in the now compromised safe. With his health declining and his estate under attack, Hogan began documenting everything with even greater urgency. He installed small hidden cameras in key areas of the house, the kitchen, his office, and even the hallway leading to his bedroom. He kept detailed written logs of who entered the house and when. He recorded voice memos daily, leaving audio trails of his suspicions, his fears, and the names of people he believed were plotting against him. Among the recordings was one particularly chilling entry. In it, Hogan described a late-night noise near his bedroom. When he checked the hallway, he noticed the door to his office was ajar. Upon investigating, he found his desk drawers had been rifled through. Nothing appeared stolen, but he was convinced someone was looking for something, possibly his backup will, or the hard drive where he stored sensitive personal files. The incident left him shaken. He changed the locks the next day and moved his essential documents to a bank vault. Despite these efforts, Hogan's health continued to fail. He lost weight, battled constant fatigue, and was often disoriented. Doctors attributed the decline to his chronic conditions, but Hogan believed otherwise. He was convinced someone was tampering with his medications again, this time more subtly. The paranoia, once dismissed as a side effect of illness, was starting to look like a valid warning. With every new face entering his home, every unexplained noise, every mysterious financial transaction, the line between health crisis and calculated crime grew thinner. A few weeks before his final collapse, Hulk Hogan made a move that would later prove pivotal. He mailed a small, unmarked package to his attorney. Inside was a USB drive containing more than 40 hours of footage collected from hidden cameras he had installed throughout his mansion. The files were labeled by date and location. Kitchen sink, 0602, office drawer, 0604. Guest room hall, 0607. Most of the videos showed nothing unusual: quiet nights, house staff preparing meals, Hogan resting or watching television. But a handful of clips revealed deeply troubling behavior. One recording captured a caregiver in the kitchen, quietly switching out a bottle of Hogan's prescribed vitamins for another unlabeled container. Another showed a late-night visitor rifling through the drawers in Hogan's study, opening folders and snapping pictures of documents with a smartphone. But the most disturbing video was from the hallway camera, a relative thought to have been in town only to support. Hogan was seen using a key to access his locked office, staying inside for over 20 minutes and leaving with a manila envelope tucked under a jacket. The attorney, stunned by the evidence, immediately contacted authorities. Law enforcement launched a quiet investigation, keeping Hogan's name out of the headlines while reviewing the footage and building a case. Digital forensics confirmed that the video files were authentic and untampered. The timestamps matched with Hogan's personal logs, strengthening the legitimacy of his growing fears. Investigators quietly obtained search warrants, combing through the bank records and phone data of the individuals seen in the videos. What they found confirmed the worst. attempts to change Hogan's estate planning documents, communications referencing large payouts, and even messages that discussed how soon it would all be over. As this evidence was being compiled, Hogan's condition took a sharp turn. His organs, already weakened by decades of strain, began to shut down. He was admitted to the hospital under a private alias to avoid media attention. Despite the severity of his decline, he remained lucid enough to speak with detectives from his hospital bed. Though his voice was weak, his words were clear. He named names, described events, and gave details that matched the video footage. Hogan knew he didn't have much time left and used what remained to ensure his story would be heard. Medical staff, already cautious, began a thorough review of the medications administered in the weeks before Hogan's final hospitalization. Alarmingly, small amounts of sedatives and tranquilizers were found in samples taken from his kitchen and medicine cabinet, compounds not prescribed to him and known to accelerate organ damage when mixed with existing prescriptions. It was now evident that Hogan's paranoia was indeed just a side effect of age or illness. He had been systematically targeted, his health deliberately compromised over time by people he once trusted. The evidence was building, and authorities prepared to make their first arrests. But just as they were finalizing the case, the news broke. Hulk Hogan had passed away in his sleep. The investigation would now become something else entirely: search for justice after death. Hulk Hogan's death sent shockwaves across the country. Media outlets scrambled to report the news, most citing long-term health issues as the cause. Fans mourned the loss of a cultural icon, believing the curtain had finally closed on a legendary life shaped by fame, fortune, and physical pain. But behind the tributes and headlines, investigators were piecing together a far darker truth. The autopsy confirmed the expected wear from years of surgeries and chronic conditions. But toxicology results raised immediate red flags. Low but consistent levels of sedatives were detected in his system, enough to steadily weaken his body over time, especially dangerous for someone already in fragile health. Armed with video evidence, financial records, and Hogan's own statements, authorities moved swiftly. 3 individuals were arrested within days of the toxicology report: his part-time caregiver, his cousin, and a legal associate who had helped draft financial documents. Each was charged with various crimes, including elder abuse, attempted fraud, and conspiracy. Investigators revealed that the group had slowly been manipulating Hogan for months, slipping sedatives into his food and drinks to keep him disoriented, while gaining control over his assets. They had forged signatures, filed fake insurance claims, and even tried to alter Hogan's will to benefit themselves. Public reaction was explosive. News outlets that had originally reported a natural death now pivoted to a criminal narrative, and Hogan's name returned to the spotlight, this time as the victim of a twisted scheme. Support poured in from the wrestling community and fans worldwide, many expressing anger that someone who had entertained millions could be betrayed in such a personal, invasive way. The betrayal cut even deeper, knowing the culprits were people he trusted, people he let into his home during his most vulnerable days. The trial captured national attention. Prosecutors presented a timeline of deceit and manipulation. Backed by damning footage from the cameras Hogan had secretly installed, jurors watched as the accused moved through his house with an eerie sense of entitlement, searching through drawers, altering documents, and discussing financial plans with others as if Hogan were already gone. Defense attorneys tried to paint Hogan as paranoid and mentally unstable, but the consistency and clarity of his documentation made those arguments fall flat. His written journals and voice recordings provided a first-hand narrative of fear, suspicion, and eventual realization. In the end, all 3 were convicted. Sentences ranged from lengthy prison terms to heavy fines and restitution payments to Hogan's estate. Though the verdicts provided some measure of justice, many felt they came too late. Hogan had spent his final months in pain, both physical and emotional, isolated by the realization that he was being preyed upon by those he once loved. Despite the tragedy, his meticulous efforts to protect himself ensured the truth came to light. His final act wasn't in a wrestling ring, but in the quiet moments he spent documenting the darkness closing in around him. Hulk Hogan's legacy was no longer just about strength and femme, was about resilience in the face of betrayal and a fight for justice, even as his body failed. His last chapter, though heartbreaking, became one of the most powerful stories he ever told.